Alrighty, welcome everybody. I would like to begin the webinar. Thank you all for taking the time today to come to our Lunch and Learn session about cat bylaws in British Columbia. So I would like to begin with some introductions. So first of all, my name is Anna Skurikhina. I'm a Cats and Birds project lead with the Stewardship Centre for BC. And today I'm joining you from Kelowna, from the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of Syilx Okanagan people and West Bank First Nation. This webinar is co-organized with our project coordinator, Ariadne Botsakis. So she'll be helping you guys out in Zoom, answering all the technical questions and regulating chat. To provide you a bit of an outline for today's webinar, we will begin with an introduction to the Stewardship Centre. We will then have presentations by our guest speakers and finally have some time for Q&A. A few logistics here. So the webinar will be recorded, but shared with everybody who signed up for this event. We encourage you to please stay muted and participate in chat instead. If you have any questions or comments, please maintain positive and respectful environment and participate in polls. We have a few of them throughout this webinar today. I would also like to start with a short disclaimer to say that this webinar really is meant for local governments interested in potentially adopting bylaws with cat provisions. It is based on fully publicly available information and resources found in BC. This webinar does not provide any legal advice, and should municipalities need legal advice, they could, of course, contact the professionals for it. To begin with, I would like to provide the overview of the Stewardship Centre. So we are a non-for-profit organization that offers a technical, educational, and capacity building resources to other organizations, local governments, private and public sector. And on this slide, you see examples of some of the current projects that we are doing. And of course, I'd like to focus on cats and birds. So Cats and Birds project is under our Wildlife and Species at Risk program, where we work together with different partners to make British Columbia a safer place for cats, birds, bats, other wildlife, and people. We do this through collaborative partnerships, through outreach and education, resource development, and research. And I'd like to start by asking the question, why are we talking about cat bylaws today? And really the main reason is cat bylaws are one of the tools in our provincial toolkit to address the roaming cat issue. They help address concerns such as cat overpopulation, proclaimed in Canada since 2017 by Humane Canada organization. They also help address unwanted pregnancies, missing cats, cat nuisance complaints, welfare of cats, those that are on the streets and left to fend for themselves. They also talk about transfer of zoonotic diseases between cats and wildlife, cats and people, and how it relates to public health. And finally, of course, cat bylaws help us address impacts, negative and significant impacts of cats on biodiversity and ecosystems. They sometimes could be a great tool for municipalities interested in getting certification to be either a bird-friendly city or a bat-friendly community, and cat bylaws play a huge role in receiving those certifications. Now, bylaws alone are not really a solution to the roaming cat problem. They're just one of the tools that is used, and we always emphasize that the bylaws need to be used in conjunction with public education on responsible pet ownership, as well as the practices that help address cat overpopulation crisis. Bylaws also need to work together with, in collaboration with local organizations such as humane groups, shelters, wildlife rehabilitation centers that are addressing the problem on the ground and involved in rehabilitation of those animals. I would now like to introduce our amazing guest speakers that are joining today's webinar. So I would like to begin with Dr. Elizabeth Gao, who is a research scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Dr. Gao is a leading expert and researcher on the ecology and behavior of wandering cats in Canada. Her team takes an interdisciplinary approach to research on cats, and she works with a variety of different stakeholders to really understand the challenges surrounding wandering cats. We also have two amazing presenters from the City of Nanaimo. Karen Robertson, she has recently retired after a 30-year-long successful career in local governments, where she worked as a corporate officer and deputy corporate officer in various BC municipalities. So during her career, she successfully implemented animal responsibility bylaw in the City of Nanaimo and two other local governments. And so today, Karen will speak to really the process of implementing those bylaws, what governments should consider when they're bringing forward this bylaw to their council, tips on engagements, and different lessons learned. And finally, we have Dave LaBerge, who is the Director of Public Safety at the City of Nanaimo. He oversees social planning, community safety, bylaw, parking, and animal control related services. He will be speaking on matters related to enforcing city's animal responsibility bylaw, how it impacts animal control operations, and the care and rehoming of impounded cats. And as we switch over to Elizabeth's presentation, I would like to ask everybody questions in poll. So I'm going to bring up the first poll here on the screen. And the question is, to what extent do you perceive roaming cats to be a concern in your community? So please take the time to vote. There you go. I see a lot of engagement, which is great. That's excellent. Almost got everybody. People comment pretty high in my community. Okay, very good. I almost got everybody's response. I'm just going to end poll and share results with everybody just so you could see. So it looks like mine are a major concern and the winning answers here. So I'm going to stop sharing this and pass it on to Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you much. And I was gonna share my screen. Okay, should be able to see my screen there. So thank you very much the introduction. Anna, it's really great to be here. So thank you everyone for coming. And so just get a few little glitches as we get. So I'm a scientist in Climate Change Canada, and I started working on cats long before I started working with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So the work I'm going to talk to you about, what I'm going to talk to you about, is not necessarily the views of Environment and Change Canada. It's based on the science that my team has done, as well as the scientific literature. And so I will not be talking directly about policies or so on, but I will sort of the background outdoor cats. I call them often outdoor cats, they're wandering cats, free roaming cats, free ranging cats. They all mean the same thing. They mean cats that are outdoors at some point unconstrained. So domestic cats are very closely related to African wild cats, and they evolved relatively recently. We're talking about 10,000 years. And although that seems like a long time, it's not in these evolutionary timescale. It means that cats have many of the same characteristics as their wild ancestors. And so they have a lot of the same physiology. They have the same very similar anatomy. They are exceptionally adapt to catch wild animals and hunt.
Hey, sorry, Elizabeth, we get a bit of an echo. Can you switch the microphone, please?
Yeah, I'll try to do that. I'm just going to stop sharing for a sec.
Sure.
Okay, is this better?
That sounds better. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. So cats are very well adapted and very similar to their past ancestors. And one of the terms that some groups in the UK have called them are wild companions. And I think this really shows what cats are. There are companion animals that we cuddle up with in our bed, in our home, but they also historically have been used for pest control. And cats actually came to North America on ships for controlling mice and rats. And so this creates a bit of a conflict where cats have these dual roles, both historical and present in some places, where they have these roles as companion animals and pest controllers, and have these evolutionary evolved traits that make them very close to their ancestors. And so when we think about cats, and this is very relevant when it comes down to, bylaws of thinking about these different sort of phases or types of cats. We have cats that never go outside. This is your typical indoor cat, and anywhere from about 70 all the way to about 85% of Canadians, depending on where you are, keep their cats solely indoors. Which is really, it's good, but it can be better. And then we have cats that are indoors and outdoors. So these are cats that people own, they can put them outside, and they have some level of control on when the cats are outside, and not necessarily where they're going, but at least when they go outside and when they don't. And then we have what we refer to free ranging, or sometimes these are called like colony cats, or cats that people feed, but they don't actually have owners. This also includes like barn cats or cats that are in colonies in cities, and then completely feral cats. And these are cats that have no owners. They're not fed. They don't even persist at all with people. And so they're completely wild and can be thought of very much as completely wild cats. And thankfully in Canada, we don't have a lot of feral cats, but we do have some. And so when we think about, cats that are outdoors, and what we're really talking about today is these sort of three categories of cats: these indoor, outdoor cats, these cats that like live in barns or colonies, and these completely feral cats. And the impacts that these cats have can be quite different depending for wildlife, for instance. So cats that are indoors and outdoor have fewer impacts on wildlife, but much more major impacts on wildlife are ones that you have to persist entirely off of the food that they capture. Additionally, it's much easier to manage cats when we're working with cats that we can manage people, although people are also very hard to work with, but it's much easier than managing completely feral cats. And so where we have lots of people, lots of human influencing time outdoors versus less influence of people on certain cat populations. So why should you really care about outdoor cats? And is it really a problem in communities? So it's human behaviors. It's what I was just talking about, whether people put their cats outside, whether we feed cats in communities, whether we're enabling environments that create cats to be able to survive. And so when cats are outside, they're allowed to wander, particularly if they are not spayed and neutered. It's very quickly that cat populations can grow. And I really like this graphic from the BC SPCA that shows that a single unspayed cat, which is 5 months old, which is about when a cat can start to reproduce, is she produces on average 4 kittens. She then, a few months later, 7 months later, all of those kittens can then produce more cats and more kittens and more kittens. So within about a year and a half, you get well over 30 cats. And that is a massive number that just continues to grow. And so what you get is these populations that become completely unchecked and unregulated because there aren't anything controlling the number of cats that are in cities, and there's nothing actually preventing more cats from coming in to environments to reproduce as well. And so a lot of different people really care about cats and have concerns about cats. These can be cat owners and people that just love animals, and veterinarians and shelter workers, and ecologists, epidemiologists and nature enthusiasts. So people often that see or think about sort of the impacts that cats have. Veterinarians and shelter workers are seeing firsthand sometimes the impacts of what outdoor cats experience, particularly veterinarians that work with street cats, which is a specialized part of veterinary medicine. So they see the different things than what cat owners and cat lovers see, as well as the general public. And then, of course, many of you probably are related to looking at policy change in cities and municipalities. So cat management, because of all these different types of cats, is quite complex. There's a lot of nuances and a lot of different directions that can be taken. And it's multifaceted, as Anna was sort of mentioning. It's not just about bylaws, but it's also about creating environments in homes that cats can thrive as well. So that's through enrichment. So this is from a paper, again, from the UK that detailed some of the management strategies that have been seen for cats. And it's a lot of it's focused on with own cats is managing access and then creating enrichment in the home and teaching people how to create environments that mimic the natural behaviors of cats so that the cats are really happy and healthy indoors. And on the other side, when we look at these cats that don't have owners, unknown cats, it's much more complicated. You're starting to think about whether there's lethal or non-lethal control because you're looking at these higher levels of population control of trying to get cats off of the streets. And so I want to talk about some of the sort of benefits as well as the negatives of cats being allowed to roam, because you might have been thinking about that. And cats are quite a divisive topic. And a lot of people think that cats should be allowed outdoors. And this is a very valid argument. As I was talking about, it helps them engage in these natural behaviors, which are part of their ecology, part of their biology, part of their history as cats. They need to be able to climb, they need to be able to scratch, they need to be able to hunt. That is part of a natural behavior. And males also like to spray and so on. So if you don't create these types of behaviors in the home, you get unwanted behaviors that often lead to, a need to put cats outside so they can engage in these behaviors. It's part of what they need. And so many people put their cats outside to allow them to engage in these behaviors. Cats, they're outside as well. Like I talk to a lot of people in communities and they have connections to the cats that are wandering around their neighborhood. They visit their backyards, they see them out on the street, and it provides them a connection to nature that they sometimes aren't getting in other ways. Unfortunately, there's a lot of negatives to cats that roam. And as an ecologist, these are things that I really focus on, my team focus on, particularly on the impacts that cats can have on wild animals. They kill massive numbers of animals every single year. In Canada, it's upwards of about 300 million birds per year are likely killed by cats. And globally, it's birds, it's mammals, small mammals, and it's into the billions or trillions of animals every single year by cats. But when cats are outside, they also face numerous welfare threats and risks. Throughout a lot of North America, we have coyotes in some parts of BC. There's cougars, there's bobcats, there's other animals, raccoons that will actively hunt and kill cats. There's vehicle collisions, which is quite common. And with all this, there's a lot of cost to society. There's been some recent papers in Science, and this is just one of them, that have tried to identify the economic costs of various, what they're classifying as invasive species, and they classify cats under that category. The various costs and cumulative costs of various animals. And so cats are considered one of the third highest cumulative damage costs across what they consider invasive species. Cats also can spread disease, both to humans from wild animals. So if a cat's a bat, they can spread a virus to the humans. And then also the other way around, where humans could spread viruses to cats. And that's been seen with like COVID-19, been spread actually both directions, from wildlife into humans and also humans into cats. So my team has been working for the past 7 years trying to count cats across a number of different areas in Canada. This is just some of the places that we've worked in. And there's a lot of numbers on here, but what I really want you to get across is that if there are people, there are cats. And it's not a matter of like, oh, this place doesn't have cats. There are cats. If there's people, there are cats. And it's really a matter of how many. And what we see is that some places have more cats than others. Some neighborhoods have more cats than others. And typically rural areas or smaller urban areas have more cats than larger urban centers on a per sort of capita basis. So places like some of the work that we've been doing in the South of Okanagan on a per person basis has about 3 cats, I think, to every 1 person. And in Vancouver, it's like 1 cat to every 17 people. So it's it's a matter of, not a matter of like if there's cats in communities, but really how many cats there are. And so every place that our team has studied does have an abundance of cats. And it doesn't matter the numbers. It matters that there are a lot of cats in cities that are likely facing various welfare threats. They're probably hunting birds and other animals that is not necessarily a good thing. So to conclude, as I said, it's not a matter of if there is an overpopulation of cats in the community, it's a matter of how bad is it. And so some places are far worse than others, but every community, I think, in Canada probably has a problem with outdoor cats to some degree. Many members of the public, I'll say, they view cats more neutrally or positively often, although there's a lot of people that view them negatively. And this is because their interaction with them, people don't often see sort of the other side. They don't see the cats that are being injured. They don't see these other sides. So that's why you often see these very diverse opinions amongst the public because of people's personal experiences. And local research, I'll say, is not necessarily needed at this point. We have enough science from the past few decades to show that we have an idea of what type of cat management, including bylaws as one form of management, is needed, and we have enough information to start to make informed decisions. So there isn't a lack of information, although local context can provide evidence of how effective something is, which is something we do need as well. But really, we know that there are cats in most municipalities at really high levels in Canada. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. As we're switching slides, I do have another poll question for everybody. It's going to launch it now. And this question asks you if you're familiar with any bylaws, whether it's a standalone cat bylaw or animal responsibility bylaw with cat provisions in BC. And I'm curious to see what you guys answer there. Okay. Most people voted. I'm going to give it another 10 seconds. Very good. Okay, I'm going to end poll here and share results. So it seems like we actually have a lot of people who are not familiar with any bylaws in the province, and some of you say that your municipality has cat provisions, which is great, or you know of other municipalities. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And with this set of slides, I'd like to provide just a general overview of the cat bylaws that we find here in BC. And I would like to begin with talking about the purpose of bylaws. So in our perspective, the purpose of this cat bylaws really are about public education and shifting a social norm to first now include cats in the animal control and recognition of cats in the bylaws, but also develop responsible cat ownership practices in the long term. And therefore, it really is a long-term solution. It's not, the bylaws are not a tool that will help to see the change overnight. And it's also a preventative measure. It's about education of future practices in our public and our communities to really see the change. Now, bylaws can also be a tool for conflict resolution, and specifically between neighbors with cats or without cats, conflicting interests, and sometimes even sort of like triggering discussions. And so bylaws could be a way to resolve that conflict and have a safer and a happier community. Bylaws are not a one-size-fits-all solution, and you will see examples of it later on in this presentation, is that each municipality has their own set of provisions that works for them because of their unique circumstances, unique situation, and also resources that are available. Bylaws are not really about keeping cats confined and limiting cat owners and what they could do. It's about integrating those responsible cat ownership practices for the benefit of cats, the people, and the environment. And finally, bylaws are not a replacement for humane organizations or wildlife rescues who are actively doing the work on the ground to help with animal welfare. So really, bylaws need to work again in collaboration with education and also with local groups that are actively involved in animal welfare work. Go to the next slide here. So there was one master thesis published by Louisa Trucks, who I believe is in the audience today, which we're really pleased to hear. And Louisa did this overview analysis of 25 prominent municipalities in BC with regards to their animal bylaws. And she really summarized kind of like the issue around bylaws and roaming cats really well. So in her quote from the study, she says, fair and comprehensive animal bylaws can protect domesticated animals, their guardians, non-pet owners, and wildlife. And they can also provide optimal balance between benefits associated with pet ownership and potential adverse impacts. On the contrary, inadequate bylaws pose risks to local governments, increased need for public spending on healthcare, animal control services, environmental conservation, and so on. So the other outcomes would include heightened public pressure. This is the conflict resolution piece I alluded to earlier, and also contention between constituents with and without pets. And I encourage everybody to look up this paper because it has a great list of recommendations for local governments in really how to pursue information around bylaws, cat bylaws, and communication with the public. Now, our Stewardship Centre for BC actually has 2 guides developed for local governments with recommended bylaws that benefit both pets and wildlife. But I did want to highlight another resource, an excellent model animal responsibility bylaw by BC's PCA, which has a list of all the different cat-related provisions that local governments could adopt in their policies. And the key provisions that we find that are relevant to cats and that are implemented in BC are, first of all, permanent identification and the way to register a licensed cat, keep track of cats, how many they are, and who is the owner of the cats. Animal limits or household limits, how many cats are allowed per household. Roaming at large, this is, of course, one of the most interesting provisions to us, and the spay and neuter provisions. We wanted to provide this overview of how interconnected they are and also that they have multiple benefits that the provisions could bring to the community. And some of those benefits are more direct. So you would see the solid lines coming out from the top boxes here. So for example, permanent identification is one of the direct measures to reunite cats with owners. Animal limits help, of course, reduce hoarding of cats. Roaming at large has multiple direct impacts, and that's where we prevent cats from roaming beyond private property, reducing nuisance complaints, reducing cat predation, zoonotic diseases, and so on. And finally, spay and neuter, again, is one of the direct measures to help address cat overpopulation, especially those stray cats, and reduce unwanted pregnancies and breeding, overly breeding with feral cats. Now, going back to our poll questions, how many municipalities, we know of in BC with no roam bylaws? And so during our sort of mini research that we've done with Ariadne is we inspected about 120 different municipalities in BC, looked up their bylaws and seen if they include any provisions about roaming. And so only about 1/3 of them did include provisions, which is not too bad. But an interesting part of it is that the provisions on roaming really vary and they're in a bit of a spectrum. So some municipalities would have indirect application of those provisions to cats, which means that they would have a provision that says that any animal roaming at large may be impounded by the animal control officer. So it's up to their discretion. Some applications are partial, which means that cats are not allowed to roam if they are in heat, like a female in heat, or if they are unspayed, or if they don't have an ID or sterilization done of them. And the other set of bylaws, which we see fewer of, but they do exist, is with complete application of no roaming, where it says that any owned cat isn't allowed to roam beyond private property. And so here I want to just give you a couple of examples of language that's used in different combination of provisions highlighted in different municipalities. And I want to emphasize that this is not by any means in comparison of which bylaw is better or worse. It is just to show that each municipality has a unique set of provisions because of a unique set of needs. And it's really great to see a variety of those examples here in BC. So City of Terrace, for example, has 3 kind of main provisions related to cats. One of them, of course, is a household limit, 4 cats per household. They have a section on impoundment where it states that any animal running at large may be impounded. And then we see impoundment costs, which is a disincentive to cat owners to allow cats to roam. So that's a really great example of this indirect application of no roaming to cats. Now we have an example from Tsawwassen First Nation where they have this partial application to cats. They have a household limit of 10 cats per household. They have mandatory spay and neuter for cats over 6 months old. And they also say that these animals are not allowed to run at large or trespass private property if they are unspayed. The next example is from the city of Richmond. They have permanent identification, actually not just permanent, temporary and permanent identification built into their bylaw, which says that the cat is expected to have either a caller ID or a tag, or a permanent ID such as tattoo or microchip. The cats should be spayed and neutered, and they're not allowed to run at large unless they are sterilized. Surrey is another example of this partial application, and Surrey actually has a specific cat regulation when it comes to spaying and neutering. So they require identification of cats, sterilization of cats, and they don't allow cats to roam unless they are sterilized. And of course, there's a penalty associated with the bylaw if the people are not following the bylaw. Now, the last set of examples I wanted to show are with complete application of no roaming. And you will notice, I wish I had more time to sort of show you more examples, but if you were to look into those bylaws, you will notice that the more provisions they are, of course, the more clear bylaws become in a sense of transparent communication of what the cat owner should do, what the dog owner should do. And that's really great. I think the longer those bylaws are, the more specific they are, the easier it is for the member of the public to understand what's expected from them. So the example from the village of Muckbright here, first of all, they define what it means to roam at large, which is to go beyond private property for a cat that's just outside, either it's a public space or somebody else's private property. They have the control of cats. The household limit, of course, is the 3 cats per household. They're not allowed to run at large, and they do also include licensing in their bylaw. Another kind of positive thing that we saw with McBride is that they conduct public education through their website. They have a page about the licensing, the benefits of it, what's expected from the public. And here's a great example of the recent communication. In their village-wide newsletter, they included information about animal license to remind people that it's there, remind that it's free, and really encourage to follow the bylaws and the good practices. When we talk about benefits of licensing, I wanted to kind of go back to some of the information we gathered from the city of Calgary, as they have a model bylaw example when it comes to cat provisions. We had a workshop with them and wanted to learn about different provisions that they used and why they chosen them. And when it comes to licensing, they emphasize that licensing allowed to benefit owners of those cats because, of course, it helps reunite lost pets with owners, but it also provides community benefits. It encourages the responsible pet ownership and also really holds people accountable. But finally, licensing is a great tool and a benefit to the city itself because it helps keep track of information about pet populations, how many cats are out there, how many of them are found to roam, and also support city initiatives with the funding that comes from licensing. I'm going to do the last example here before we move on to next presentations. And this is a bylaw from Cranbrook. Again, it's another extensive and very detailed, great bylaw that also includes licensing. They do have a household limit of pets, again, to 3 cats. They forbid any running at large for any animal, not just cats, of course, and they have an interesting list of prohibited areas. It's something that we don't see in all of the bylaws, but it's great that it's included, and playgrounds are one of them. It's common to receive cat-related nuisance complaints from public spaces, parks, playgrounds, where those cats might defecate, and so then they also have a provision here about cleaning, after the pets. They have a great section about impoundment fees, what is required or not required, what decisions could be made when it comes to impoundment by the animal control officers and how much it's going to cost to the owners. And here they provide an incentive for licensing and sterilizing cats by offering, of course, lower rates in this impoundment fees compared to unlicensed and non-sterilized cats. Finally, they too have great information on their website, really clear communication with the cat owners, how to do licensing, why they should consider it, and the benefits and the bonuses provided with licensing to cat owners. So hopefully this provided a bit of a general overview of kind of like the types of different bylaws that are out there, but I would like to turn it over to Karen and Dave to give a bit more of a specific example of how the animal responsibility bylaw was implemented in the city of Nanaimo and what are some of the lessons learned. Okay, Karen, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to thank Anna for inviting us here today to speak to you. It's exciting to see so many people that are interested in this topic and specifically as it relates to cat welfare provisions. Dave and I put a joint presentation together, and so my portion is going to focus primarily on sharing my experiences with drafting the animal responsibility bylaw that contains CAT provisions, sort of who I consulted with during the process, what type of community engagement we used, and then some of those lessons learned. And then I'll turn it over to Dave, who will talk about the enforcement piece and particularly what to consider when it comes to enforcing the CAT roaming provisions. So in the past 10 years, I've implemented a new animal responsibility bylaw with CAT provisions in 3 separate municipalities. There was the City of Duncan, the District of North Cowichan, and most recently the City of Nanaimo. And we don't have a lot of time today, but my hope is that I can give you at least some tips on where to start. And so what precipitated, next slide, please. What precipitated the first bylaw I did, and my initial experience was in Duncan in 2014, and it was after being contacted by Erica Paul, who is an outreach officer for the SPCA. And their goal is they were going up and down the island, approaching various municipalities, really wanting to bring awareness to the SPCA model bylaws and looking at places that had outdated bylaws with a focus on animal regulation and trying to shift the focus to animal responsibility. So they put together a suite of bylaws that deal with animal care that included provisions for licensing and identification, licensing for dog kennels and catteries and pet stores, and spay-neuter initiatives to address cat overpopulation and dog overpopulation as well. So if you're looking for a sample bylaw, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the SPCA model bylaws. They're very robust. They have had a legal review. And what I liked about them is that they're robust enough that they can work for a very large community, but they can also work for smaller communities as well. You just need to take a look at the provisions and then pick out those that are most applicable to the needs of what your community is going through. So when I was working in Duncan, I did have bylaw enforcement as part of my portfolio, and we were already dealing with the cat complaints associated with, the cats defecating in my neighbor's yard, and cats were running at large, and cat hoarding was also a bit of an issue as well. So council was definitely supportive after hearing the delegation of staff looking into bylaws that would address those issues. They were not in favor of licensing of cats, and at the time I actually thought that that was kind of wise, as these were really new provisions back then for the city. And so I guess when introducing those new provisions is look for ones that are easy wins, in my opinion, mandatory identification and sterilization, and ones that will have the most impact, such as the cat roaming. Then, give the community some time to sit with it, work with it, give the staff time to work with those provisions, and then look at introducing subsequent amendments down the road if there's a need. So in terms of consultation, I believe it's imperative to have input from the experts on the draft of the bylaw up front before you go to council. At minimum, include your bylaw enforcement manager, the bylaw enforcement team, a rep from the SPCA, and your animal control provider and their staff wherever possible. They have the practical experience, the expertise, and they will help champion the bylaw when it comes time to present it to council. Also think about any special interest groups that might be affected. The approach I took at the time was, it seemed to work pretty well. And what I did is I put together an initial draft with input from the staff at City Hall. Then I circulated it to the SPCA and our animal control provider for input. And then I compiled their results and then put together a face-to-face meeting where we allowed lots of time for in-depth discussion. And we literally went through the bylaw clause by clause, looking for consents where possible or finding out what might be prickly or areas where we might have been divided on our opinion. And those were the clauses that we focused on. So the ones that we were divided, those are the ones that you would pull out and provide options so that council can be the final decision maker. So for the one that we experienced was breed-specific legislation. There's some that are in for and some are against. So that's the one where we put it into council's lap to see what they felt about it. So other than that, once you've got some robust initial input from those experts, you can basically bring forward a bylaw almost in a finalized form for council's review. when it comes time to present the bylaw, have the SPCA rep and your animal control provider at the meeting, and even better, have them be a delegation up front to speak to the bylaw, and also let them know, or let council know, that they're on hand to answer questions. They are your best resource and support. Once the bylaw is adopted, you might discover, like I did at the time, that you miss a legitimate group that will be affected by some of those new provisions that you didn't think of. And that's okay. Just give yourself grace, because these bylaws are challenging and it's tough to think of every scenario. So in my case, I didn't realize the effect the clause that prohibited the feeding of feral cats would have on the Couch and Cat Rescue Society, who is the local trap neuter release they run the trap neuter release program. They have citizens that belong to the society that have established cat colonies on their property, and these cats rely on those colonies for food and shelter, and they're cats that are virtually impossible to rehome. So it's okay to make exemptions in your bylaw for those types of organizations. Unfortunately, how I found out was that I made it in the paper and a bunch of angry letters were sent to council, but a quick phone call to the organization to say, look, it was not our intent to fetter the work that you do. We'll do a very quick bylaw amendment, and we resolved it really, really quickly. So other than that, there seemed to be general support for the community on our bylaw, with a few exceptions. And so we didn't have to do a ton of public engagement, and getting the bylaw implemented was relatively seamless. In 2017, so if you want to just switch the slide for me, Anna. I took a position at the District of North Cowichan, and shortly after starting, a group of citizens calling themselves Pause for a Cause lobbied council to adopt a similar bylaw to the one that I had done in Duncan. And in this case, it was community driven to address a severe case of animal abuse that was being highlighted in the paper. They were also seeking to have the breed-specific legislation that was in the existing bylaw removed. So based on their delegation, council directed staff to look at developing a similar bylaw to the one that I worked on in Duncan. And so based on what I learned last time, I was sure to invite Couch and Cat Rescue this time for input and provide them assurances that the same considerations would be given to them as were given to them in Duncan. Now, because North Cowichan, Duncan, the Cowichan Valley Regional District, and Cowichan tribes have very intertwined interjurisdictional boundaries, and we all had the same animal control provider, I expanded the consultation group this time to include corporate officers and bylaw enforcement officers from all of our neighboring jurisdictions. Also invited the SPCA again. Erica was still in her role, so she came, a rep from the Couch and Cat Rescue, and also this time a rep from the Pause for a Cause. And it made sense to the group to have the same provisions in our respective bylaws wherever possible, so that adherence by members of the public and enforcement didn't confuse the public or the animal control provider, because there were some different rules for each one, and people don't understand the different jurisdictional boundaries. So again, we invited the SPCA and the provider to come to council, and they were able to respond to questions. Council really, really appreciated the work that staff did working collectively with our neighbors. And I think it went a long way into council throwing their support behind the bylaw. Press coverage in North Cowichan was also a little different, because the focus really was on the animal cruelty piece. So the community was very, very supportive of the bylaw being implemented. And I'd say probably the major pushback that we got, or the controversial piece, was the breed-specific legislation. We had lots of letters for and against, and again, we left that decision to council. Roaming cat provisions never made it on anybody's radar. So again, the bylaw went through fairly smoothly. Next slide, please, Anna. So in 2020, I took a position with the City of Nanaimo, and once again, the animal responsibility bylaw followed me. This time, the driver was related to the animal services contract. The service had not been looked at for a number of years, and in 2019, council directed or hired a consultant to do a very comprehensive review. And through that review, the consultant had been looking at some of the other bylaws that had been done, and they included North Cowichan and Duncan's in there. And so they put forward recommendations to have a new animal responsibility bylaw done that includes provisions for cat identification, mandatory spay and neutering for every cat that was permitted to go outside, cats being prohibited from being at large in a public place or on another person's property, and to renovate the pound to include a cat wing for the intake, care, and impoundments of stray cats. And this is key. Whether you have an independent contractor that runs your pound or your pound is in-house, you must ensure that the pound can accommodate the cats that if you choose to proceed with the anti-roaming provisions. And Dave will speak to this a little bit in a little bit. It was also important to provide an annual grant in aid to the Catnap Society to support the organization's work. They're key in helping to keep the overpopulation of cats down. So council did pass the consultant's recommendations and directed staff to proceed with drafting a bylaw. They too were not interested at all in exploring cat licensing at the time. And given I had worked on this project twice before, as was done in the previous two places I worked at, I invited all the appropriate stakeholders to comment on, and again, we invited the SPCA and the animal control provider. And I tell you, their support is so invaluable. They can answer all the tough questions. They have the expertise. We did have a bit of challenge because at the time it was during COVID, but so we couldn't have an in-person meeting, but we did manage. In terms of press coverage, though, for Nanaimo, when we did present it to council, the reporter put on the front page of the paper that Nanaimo was banning roaming cats and had a big picture of a cat. And the way it was reported, it ignited a firestorm of angry letters from cat owners. And so because of this, council did get a bit concerned about moving forward with the cat roaming provisions. However, they agreed to hold off on making their decision until staff could do more public engagement. So the bylaw consideration was put on hold, and we ran a survey, which I highly recommended. We conducted a poll on probably more of some of the contentious provisions, and we got 444 responses. Next slide, Anna. So the results of the poll were that there was 95% support for mandatory identification of cats. People thought it was, for the most part, a great idea. Next slide. People were also very supportive of mandatory sterilization for cats with 94%. There were some exemptions for cat breeders, of course, and reduced fines for those who had been sterilized. Next slide. The roaming cat provision, however, was opposed by 65% of those who submitted responses. Those who supported or did not support, the comments are on the slide there, so I won't replicate those. But council had some reservations based on those numbers. But at the end of the day, what I believe swayed them was a very compelling letter that was submitted by Dr. Amy Wilson. And she sent it on behalf of a group of scientists and veterinarians that lived and studied wildlife on Vancouver Island. Their letter was very science-based, and they expressed their strong support for all the cat roaming, or all the cat provisions, but particularly the cat roaming provision. Staff also brought forward at the same time, when we were coming back with it, a proposed promise to return policy. And this was based on the one that the City of Calgary had done, and my hat's off to them. They did such an amazing job with everything they did with getting that bylaw implemented. But basically, the policy was such that if cat owners' cat got impounded, there was a 2-year grace period where they wouldn't get fined. There would be some educational opportunities and provided back to the owner free of charge. This also gave the public a couple of years grace period to get used to the new cat provisions. And council, I was told afterwards, said that was also a determining factor with them moving forward with it, is just the fact that it was allowing people time to get used to the new provision. The bylaw itself had an extensive legal review by our lawyer. And one thing I did find interesting that I didn't quite think of previously when I had done this is that we likely needed minister approval. given the language we spoke about within the bylaw, regulated wildlife to some degree, including within some of our definitions. So after third reading, we forwarded it to the ministry review, and we ended up having a few back and forth meetings with the legal team from the ministry. We did find it challenging the way the province defined wildlife, which made it a bit tough for us to determine which creature is actually considered wildlife. There's some nuances with rabbits and such. So to ensure we were falling within the specific approval scheme and to avoid a very, a long list of what might be exemptions or something, it was just ultimately easier to get ministerial approval on the bylaw. But this step did add an extra couple of months to get us to the approval process. After the bylaw received 3 readings and ministerial approval, and prior to adoption, we made sure that we had news releases prepared, a fact sheet. So I guess you can go to the next slide, Anna. Oh, that's the policy. Sorry, I was a slide behind there, but I think everyone will get copies of this. So next slide. That's our minister approval. And then next slide. This was sort of a double-sided piece that allowed us to just be able to hand out the document to those who might be interested. It was like a quick snapshot. So with the public consultation, minister approval, the total time it took from the time we first introduced the bylaw to council to adoption was 10 months. And one final thought before I turn it over to Dave is that should you move forward with introducing any animal provisions, you will likely get pushback from the public and animal groups, but consider their feedback as well, because I gleaned some really valuable information. For example, when we were considering pet limits, we started out with a 6 companion animal limit. And this also included birds. But then we were contacted by a group of folks who are retired that love to have finches. And they advised us that small flock birds don't do well in smaller groups. So we met again, did a bit of investigation, and we did not see, we didn't want to penalize those folks, and we didn't see a problem with them having 12 small flock birds. However, we didn't also inadvertently want to now be able to provide people with 12 dogs or 12 cats or 12 larger birds. So we were able to design the provision to allow a person to have up to 12 animals to accommodate those with the flock birds. But within the provision, one could have no more than 6 companion animals. And within that 6 companion animal limit, one could have not more than 4 dogs over the age of 16 weeks, no more than 4 hook-billed birds, and no more than 5 cats over the age of 12 weeks. So as an example of how our bylaw worked is one could have 6 small flock birds, 3 cats, and 3 dogs and still meet the bylaw requirements. So at the end of the day, though, what helped me in speaking with members of the public who were just not wanting new provisions related to cats at all is that 35 years ago, the city basically had no regulations regarding dogs. And when they were implemented, there was an uproar. But now it's normal. Dog provisions are normal. So I'm optimistic that over time, the same will hold true for cats. So thank you for listening, and I'll turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess the peril being last, as I see we're quite short on time, so I'm going to try to rush a little bit, so forgive me for that. I'm going to talk about the enforcement and pound challenges that come with these types of regulations. I'm not going to go into the regulations in any great detail. But you see in the slide that our previous bylaw had one provision relating to cats, and that's caring for cats that are sick or injured or diseased. We actually never enforced that bylaw in all the years it was on our books. And our bylaw was actually quite weak because it had no provisions that gave us authority to impound, to charge for board fees or collect vet costs and things that you really want to incorporate in your bylaws. Most of the cats that came into our care at that time were cats that had been brought in because they were injured or hit by cars, and that was 5, 6, 7 cats a month. You see with our new bylaw now, we do have quite a suite of regulations, and they now generate a lot of calls, and we get a lot more animals come into our pound facility. In Nanaimo, our animal control enforcement is done by a third-party contractor. And one thing, if you're going to consider these type of provisions, is you want to coordinate it with the timing of your contract, because I was about 3 years into a 5-year contract when we enacted this. And what the new regulations did was create a lot more investigative work and impound work for the contractor. So it changed the scope of the work considerably. So to get through the rest of that year, I had to find funds from other cost centers to cover those costs. And then I had to take the contract back to market a year sooner than I wanted to, so that we could renegotiate the terms of that. So something you really want to think about as far as the timing to execute these things. And the next slide, please. This is just a quick snapshot of what the roaming provisions look like. There's two of them, one for animals that are on private property and the other for the public property. I've kind of got a kick of saying to Karen about you can't allow your cats to roam on neighboring properties without consent. So I don't know if you tell them it's okay to go to Mrs. Smith's yard because they're nice, but stay away from grumpy Mr. Jones' garden or something. And the other pieces in our public domains, we actually do get people to bring their cats down to the seawall. They often in tethers or in baby carriages, etc. And the next slide, please. Karen also discussed the fact that we phased enforcement measures in the first year that was enacted. And, what you find inevitably is no matter how much work goes into public awareness campaigns, that information doesn't get to a lot of pet owners. And when she said that there's a lot of strong and opposing views on cat regulations, people who don't want their neighbors' cats in their gardens and people who see them as sentient beings who should be free to roam, here's where you're going to really hear from them. It's one thing to do a survey. It's another thing when the complaints and the impounds start to happen. So to be clear, we don't proactively enforce these regulations. We investigate them by complaint only. And the other thing is that we don't trap cats, but we have an inventory of live traps that we loan out to homeowners, and they can place them on their property. And if a cat is trapped, we'll pick them up and take them to the pound facility. And an interesting thing that I've got quite frequently since we acted the bylaw, and this is about setting public expectations, is there's quite a few encounters where dogs get scratched and injured on their own properties from roaming cats from next door, scratch their eyes, and sometimes the vet bills are $5,000 and $6,000 as a result. And we're getting a lot of calls with the expectation that because the cat was trespassing on the property and we have the bylaw, that they expect that the city should be able to compel the cat owners to pay the vet bills. And clearly for anybody that enforces these bylaws, it's not the case, but it's a live issue and it's just something you might want to put out in your education pieces. Next slide, please, Anna. There we go. So I mentioned earlier that the new cat regulations increased our investigative and kennel workload, and this gives you a snapshot of how much it changed during the enactment. We went from having about 5 cats a month. Now, at any given time, we have 15, 16, up to 20 cats in a time. It's more than doubled in the time that since the bylaw came in. And what's significant that you really want to take note of is you see that only a third of the cats that come into our care and that are impounded are ever claimed or returned to an original home or owner. A lot of these cats, once they come in our care, it's on us to get them rehoused and adopted. Next slide, please. So our contractor provided me some useful insights about cats that come into their care at the pound facility. In general, they say that a great deal of them are not in good health, and that's ultimately what brings them into our care. Things like abscesses, ear infections, dental problems are really common. They say a lot of them have blood in their urine, dehydrated, underweight, poor coats, poor hygiene, etc. A good number of them are feral or semi-feral, and just the encounter of being trapped and removed from their homes leaves them traumatized. So a lot of them are fearful, shut down, or vicious. Some of them are at the end of their life. And all these factors make them much, much less desirable for adoption. We all know that people want cute, playful cats. The ones we tend to get are the old, sickly, the ugly ones, the black cats, the tomcats. These are the ones that folks don't know. So a lot of the cats that come in our care actually remain in the pound facility for months at a time. In most cases, much longer than dogs typically stay. So you have to really factor the costs that go with that. Next slide, please, Anna. As I mentioned earlier, this all translates to increased costs for care. In the case of our pound facility, it's a 1960s circa building, and every bit of space was already in use when we brought in these bylaws, regulations. And, we really had to scramble and improvise to put additional kennel resources that adorn the hallways and in the staff lunchroom to accommodate the demands. Another thing you really need is a cat isolation room because, as we said, so many of the cats that come in are sick. And when you receive them, these cats are really susceptible to upper respiratory tract infections and other infectious conditions. And you have to get them coming into isolation when they come in. And we also have to have a flea and deworming program for every new arrival because we don't know their history. So all this translates to extra staffing costs, additional kennel needs, and you also have to contemplate that you need staff to transport these sick animals to and from vet appointments. Not all this happens during business hours, so our overtime costs have escalated because we have to bring staff in during night hours sometimes to sustain treatment regimens. And as I said, because so many of these cats are typically abandoned or unclaimed, we ultimately bear the cost and care of care and treatment, and this most months translates into several $1,000s. And as of course anybody who has cats knows, there's just a plethora of things that keep them happy: food, litter, toys, bedding requirements, etc. And the level of hygiene standards that we have to do for having so many animals is very high. So our electrical costs, our cleaning costs, our laundry costs have all gone up accordingly. And next slide, please. So probably the biggest takeaways from our experience is the issues of capacity. If you're going to regulate cats, it's inevitably going to bring more cats in the care of the municipality. We have a local SPCA that has a really nice new modern kennel facility, and we envy it very much. And they regularly turn away people that want to drop off found or unwanted cats because they don't have the space to accommodate it. On occasion, we're forced to turn away people at the same time for the same reason, but it seems to cause a lot more anger and pushback because people think it's part of our regulations. We have an animal service and they feel there's an obligation on our part. So in our experience, and it was touched on earlier, the real saving grace for us are the local nonprofit cat advocacy groups, the ones that catch feral cats, spay and neuter them and adopt them, because without their services, the local cat population here would truly be unmanageable. So if you're contemplating these types of regulations, be in mind that you're going to be caring for a lot more animals and expect them to be there much longer than your dogs are. And really be thoughtful of what I said at the onset. Take care to make sure you include authorities in your bylaw so you can charge and collect for related impound fees, for board fees, and for the recovery of vet fees, because they do become quite significant over time. So thanks. I think I just went a few minutes over, and I'll turn it back to Anna. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both to Karen and Dave. This was interesting to see the insight and the experience with implementing and running the bylaw. So considering the time, I wanted to let people know that, of course, we're going over time a little bit. We'll answer a couple of questions, and then we'll try to address the rest of them over email. You will receive a follow-up email from us, which will also include a feedback survey, which we hope that you will fill out, and then a recording of this event. Let's look at some of the questions here. So the first question is this issue, roaming outdoor cats, more prevalent in city urban spaces or in rural spaces? This might be a good question for Elizabeth.
Yeah, there are certainly more cats in urban spaces because there's more people. But one of the problems that we see in rural spaces is there tends to be more unknown cats. So these are cats like barn cats or cats that people are feeding on their property that they may keep around more in they think it helps with pest control, which it may. And so, yeah, there can sometimes be more cats in a small area in rural areas. As cities, the cats are often throughout the entire city. So it's a bit of a depends type question, but it's often different types of cats in terms of how you might be regulating the population. It's less about people management in rural areas, although there is some element of it. But it's really about like people management in cities, because it's typically cats that people own that are putting outside in cities.
Great. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Elizabeth. The next question here, which had some popularity in chat, looks like, has any municipality or city had success implementing mitigation measures that worked on reducing feral or outdoor cats? And I'm curious if anybody wants to take on this question. Elizabeth or Karen?
I'll defer to Elizabeth on that one. She probably had more experience with that.
So what was the question specifically?
The question is, if you know of any municipalities or city that had success implementing mitigation measures that worked on reducing feral cat colonies.
The feral cat colonies are a bit complicated because it's a matter of like, it has to work with the shelter system and like how much is feeding, how many cats are spayed, neutered, and how many cats are coming into the system. So the answer is like, there hasn't been any specific like municipalities that have really been successful at it. It's really complicated to manage cat populations when you start to get into a lot of the colony cats. And so I don't know of any super successful, but it takes very drastic action. And so that's like massive numbers of cats that are spayed and neutered, rehomed. It may even include euthanizing some cats, like the cats that are really sick that are unlikely to survive or be rehomed. So that it's quite complicated and would require a lot of money and a lot of participation from a lot of different groups for it to happen.
Got it. Okay, thank you. The next question, it's great to have bylaws, but there seems to be no compliance with them. How many people look up cat bylaws in their own community to know what and what not to do? Perhaps there needs to be mandatories at the beginning of a cat ownership process, like licensing, spaying, informational booklets about the impacts of cats. So with piece of compliance, I guess, I wonder if Dave or Karen wanted to comment on it. Ensuring compliance.
I think after speaking with Dave and recognizing how much the costs have increased since implementing these provisions, that probably this is a good business case for us to go back to council to say, look, we've lived with this bylaw for 4 years now. These are some of the issues, the biggest one being cost. And, compliance could be part of it. Because we do have that opportunity when we do dog licensing. So council may be a little bit more inclined to perhaps look at supporting cat licensing, whereas previously they weren't. They just thought it was going to be the end of their political careers if they did that. But, this would be a way to help fund the additional costs that Dave was referring to, and also give us an opportunity to send out information, not unlike, you get those lovely little charts and comments when you get your taxes. This is where your tax dollars are going. So I think there's room for improvement on that. I think we just needed to get through these first few years to just see, okay, where are the issues and what's working well as well. So.
Great. Yes, thanks for that answer. I know that with our communication with the City of Calgary and sort of learning about their process with compliance, for them, really, the key idea was that the goal is to talk to cat owners. Bylaw is an opportunity to connect with the public and really talk about the benefits, talk about why the bylaw has certain provisions. And they wouldn't even penalize a lot of the, members of the public who have outdoor cats, because it's not the idea to go and punish and then get money from the public for what they're not doing right necessarily, but is to educate and really build a new social norm and responsible social norm when it comes to cat ownership. Perhaps we'll do one more question. Has there been any discussion at the provincial level of government about classifying domestic cats as invasive species when they are located outside of the confines of a dwelling or building? Elizabeth, do you know with the classification of invasive species?
I don't know if that's like been discussed at provincial or federal levels at all.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'm also not really familiar with it, so it'd be a good question for us to explore. I see a few more questions left. We're going to try to address them over email just to save everybody's time. Thank you all for coming, and a huge thank you to our presenters today to really sharing your expertise and experience. I appreciate all of your times. Please fill out the feedback survey that we will send you over email, and have a great day.